Meanwhile, leaders across the world watch the conflict with concern. Each nation, each cultural group, remembers the stories of the Three Peaks and sees in them reflections of their own histories and struggles. The three mountains have become symbols of global conflict, strength, wisdom, and wealth, qualities that each nation claims as its own. Chapter 5. Echoes and Resolutions. As the world faces the consequences of these millennia-old conflicts, a new voice rises, the voice of reconciliation. In an unprecedented meeting, representatives from the Northern Confederacy, Eastern Alliance, and Southern Union come together at the base of the mountains. They bring with them stories, artifacts, and legends passed down through their ancestors. The leaders spend weeks in negotiations, and while they disagree often, they feel the weight of history pushing them toward peace. They draft a declaration of unity, recognizing each tribe's unique legacy and committing to the preservation of the land surrounding the mountains. They create sanctuaries around each peak, open to all people who come with respect, and vow to share resources in a way that honors each culture's traditions. Yet, they know that these ancient echoes may never fully fade. And perhaps that's as it should be, for from the past, humanity draws its deepest truths, both painful and profound. The story of the Three Peaks and the people who fought over them, now bound in a fragile peace, will remind future generations of both the power and cost of legacy. The Three Peaks, Valhanda, Lechina, and Ulrahra, remain as ever symbols of humanity's strengths, aspirations, and scars. Yet they know that these ancient echoes may never fully fade. And perhaps that's as it should be, for from the past, humanity draws its deepest truths, both painful and profound. The story of the Three Peaks and the people who fought over them, now bound in a fragile peace, will remind future generations of both the power and cost of legacy. As the dawn broke over the Three Peaks, the representatives gathered for a closing ceremony, planting a flag that bore symbols from each culture around a shared emblem, a simple circle meant to represent unity without hierarchy. They stood in silence, feeling the weight of their ancestors' struggles, mingling with the hope that this fragile truce might endure. A soft wind swept over the mountains, carrying their prayers and promises to lands beyond. And yet, even in that moment, under the watchful gaze of the peaks, subtle doubts lingered. Leaders wondered if future generations, distant from these conversations, might once again be drawn into the magnetic pull of the peaks, resurrecting old conflicts under new banners. Could the roots of these ancient rivalries ever truly be severed? Or were they woven so deeply into the fabric of human nature that every new generation would feel their pull? Determined to break the cycle, the representatives established a school at the base of the mountains where children from all three regions would study together. This school would teach history as a shared narrative rather than one of competing heroes and villains. It would emphasize the lessons of cooperation and the fragility of peace. And above all, it would honor the memory of those who had fought and fallen on all sides. As the years passed, this school became a beacon of hope. Generations of children learned the history of the Three Peaks, but rather than being driven by fear or pride, they grew up with a reverence for the shared earth beneath them. Stories of old enmities softened into legends, and new traditions took root. Ones focused on preserving the land, celebrating shared cultural festivals, and honoring the peaks as a testament to human resilience and wisdom. But even as peace grew stronger, the mountains remained a solemn reminder. Each summit stood tall, casting long shadows over the valleys below, a quiet and eternal witness to the human journey from division to unity. The people of the mountains had finally found a way to honor their past while forging a future built on respect and understanding. In time, travelers from around the world came to visit the Three Peaks, drawn by tales of the mountain's deep history and the resilience of the people who lived in their shadow. And so the mountains, Valhanda, Lashina, and Ulrahra, became symbols not just of ancient conflicts, but of humankind's capacity to heal and to find strength in unity. The echoes of the past still lingered, but they had become a song of peace, woven into the air, whispered among the trees, and carried forward, not as a warning, but as a promise of hope. Certainly, here's a story that delves deep into historical roots, cultural divides, and the legacies that continue to shape conflicts today. This tale spans millennia, crossing continents and focusing on both the people and the ideas that endure through echoes of the past. Echoes of the past, ancient roots of global conflict. Long before the modern world took shape, before borders were drawn and treaties signed, humanity lived under the shadow of ancient truths and primal conflicts. Some conflicts were born of survival, others of faith, and some from a desire to control the resources of the world. But whatever the cause, these ancient conflicts left marks, echoes, resonating through the ages, shaping even our present. Chapter 1. The Legend of the Three Peaks. The story begins in a remote mountain range, where three peaks rose high into the sky, each with a distinct name and significance. To the northern tribes, the tallest peak, Valhanda, symbolized strength. For the tribes of the east, Leachina, a shorter yet mystical mountain, represented wisdom and inner knowledge. The southern tribes called the final peak Ulrahra, a place of wealth and fertility. Each tribe revered its peak, believing it to be the heart of the world's balance. But as they grew and spread, each group began to claim that their peak was the one true center. This wasn't just an argument over beliefs. It was a deep-rooted spiritual competition that drove the tribes into skirmishes, alliances, and betrayals. A young warrior named Kala from the northern tribes saw her village ravaged in a raid by eastern soldiers who believed the northern tribes' expansion threatened their mystical ways. Kala's people survived, but she vowed revenge, marking the beginning of a bitter generational hatred between the two tribes. Little did they know that their conflict over the peaks would be passed down through centuries. Chapter 2. Empires rise, legacies endure. The world shifted, empires rose and fell, and new religions and philosophies spread. But as vast empires began to encompass multiple tribes, they also inherited these rivalries. The Northern Kingdom, where Kala's descendants now lived, conquered the lands of the eastern tribes, suppressing their culture and beliefs to assert dominance over Leachina. As time passed, these forced hierarchies of culture and power brought forth an underground resistance. People from both regions remembered the ancient tribes and held secret gatherings, where they recited poems and fables that had survived the generations. These gatherings bred seeds of rebellion and an enduring thirst for freedom and recognition. Chapter 3. Enlightenment or Domination. Centuries later, when ideas of freedom and self-determination began to circulate across the globe, it seemed as though these ancient wounds might finally heal. Philosophers, artists, and thinkers rose up, preaching the unity of humankind. The peaks, they argued, were symbols, not boundaries. Yet the cultural elites of the empires used these very ideas to justify new forms of domination. In one particularly brutal campaign, the Kingdom of Almoria, a rising global superpower, invaded smaller nations around the mountains. Their leaders declared it a reunification, citing the shared heritage of the three peaks. But behind this noble-sounding cause lay a darker reality. Almoria's true goal was to gain access to the mineral-rich lands around Ulrahra, the mountain of wealth. Local populations, however, were far from willing to accept the unity offered by Almoria. The echoes of their tribal heritage called out to them, reminding them of their unique identities. Bands of rebels began to form, And while Almoria's forces had sophisticated weaponry, the people's resolve, fueled by ancient grievances, posed a formidable challenge. Chapter 4. The Modern Age. Old Battles in New Forms. Today, thousands of years later, the battlefields have changed, but the underlying tensions persist. The descendants of Kayla's people, now living in a modern city in the Northern Confederacy, find themselves fighting for land rights against corporations that trace back to Almoria's rule. The corporations, backed by international interests, argue that the land is theirs to exploit. After all, it lies within their legal borders. On the other side, the people of the Eastern lands, now scholars, activists, and teachers, revive the stories of the mountains to resist corporate greed. They use social media and public demonstrations to unite others, drawing attention to how these legal claims disregard the sanctity of their ancestral lands. The symbol of the Three Peaks becomes a rallying cry for environmental protection, indigenous rights, and historical justice.